I am going to turn it over to Lynn DiStagio, who's the president of the Alumni Association Class of '74.
Thanks a lot to all of you for joining today. I hope those of you who were in harm's way with the snowstorm are safe and warm today. And thank you very much for making time to have lunch with us and hear this excellent presentation. In 1979, when the Board of Trustees announced that Wilson College would close, the first order of business was action. Time was of the essence, and a bias for quick action was what was needed. That said, as many alums banded together to act, notes were made, journals were kept, and even news outlets began to cover all of this activity. Even once the college was saved from closure, there was still significant work needed to position Wilson to continue to function. Along the way, several alums who were in the thick of the action thought they'd someday write their memoirs of these critical days in Wilson's history. Some even began gathering information and making plans, but as often happens, life got in the way. How lucky we are that President Emerita Mary Linda Sorber Merriam Armacost connected with Nancy Adams Besch, who had been working with two other very involved alums, gathering information that they hoped would become a book. Mary Linda agreed to undertake the project in collaboration with Nancy of creating a book that told the story of what happened at Wilson in that pivotal decade, 1979 to 1989. These two talented, dedicated, and very generous women not only created The College That Refused to Die, The Untold Story of Wilson College from 1979 to 1989, a documentary history. They covered the costs of securing permission to quote the articles from many publications that reported on the story, and they have now assigned their rights to the book to the Alumni Association of Wilson College, enabling us to raise money for the association from the sales of the books. We use that money to support the college and its students, so I encourage all of you to get your copies. Paperbacks can be bought on Amazon for $15, and hardcover copies can be bought at lulu.com for $25. It's now my great honor and pleasure to introduce our first speaker, Nancy Adams Besch from the class of 1948. She is a former president of the Alumni Association of Wilson College, the chair of the Save the Wilson College Committee formed in 1979, and a former member and chair of the Wilson College Board of Trustees. Nancy.
Well, thank you, Lynn, and thank you, Mary Beth. And it's wonderful to see all these faces. I'm happy to see Betsy Stevens, one of my classmates. Anyhow, I would like to start by saying that a lot of people shared in this 1979 incident. And I tell you, it was, to me, one of the most critical times that I have ever lived through. It started out, of course, with the phone call from the president of the Alumni Association, who alerted me 5 minutes before the announcement was to be made that the college was going to be closed. And I was shocked. And I have to, at this time, say that I immediately called my friend Eleanor Martin Allen, class of '49, and said, Ellie, did you hear? And you have to know, in those days, of course, we didn't have the technology we have today. Telephones were the only ways we had to access each other. And of course, each of the dorms at Wilson had like one telephone each. So you can imagine the word spread slowly, but it spread quickly. And with that, almost from the beginning, after the court ruled that the college must remain open, from that time on, it was absolutely, to me, the time of a new beginning for Wilson College. And it's been exciting to watch But I have to tell you, in 79, I give credit to two people who were really very important to what happened as a result of the court decision. The two people that I give credit to, Drew Stice, who came to us, and he was very helpful in getting the word out because, of course, he had connections with the news world. And so we were able to get our message out into major news areas. And that was very important. And the other person I give a lot of credit to, I give it credit to our lawyers, and especially Wes Oler. He and I worked together. Wes was then a practicing attorney in Carlisle. He had his day job, of course, in his offices. And at 10 o'clock at night, I would go to Carlisle and he and I would discuss what was going on. And so those two people played a major role in the success of the 79 court decision. But at the same time, I give a lot of credit to my two colleagues, neither of whom is with us today, but Carol Shop and Joan Edwards and I worked very closely together those whole tumultuous days. And we had really planned, and in fact, Drew Stice had even developed an outline as to what he thought we should write a book and we should start immediately. However, the presidents of the college at the time, the interim president, Don Bletz, and Mary Linda Merriam, when she came, Mary Linda Armacost now, when she came, and the presidents that followed her also felt that we didn't want to print a book and have incoming applicants for Wilson College have their parents, in fact, more than the students probably, but have their parents feel that, uh-oh, the college almost closed, and do we want to send our daughters to Wilson? So it took a long time. It took 40 years for this book to be published finally. But thank you, Mary Linda Merriam Armacost, because I tell you what, I was thrilled when Mary Linda agreed that she would write this book. And although—
Well, that's not too bad. Okay.
Although I want to—
Thank you. I don't know what you did, but thank you very much.
Okay,
That way you and I both get what we want.
there you go, buddy.
Well, anyhow, Mary Linda took over where Joan, Carol, and I should tell you, Joan Edwards, Carol Shop, and I met Monday mornings for a couple of years. Every Monday we would go to Wilson. In fact, that's where we met Amy Ensley, and I see her there now too. And we would meet in the archives, and we would write our recollections and bring all of the information that we had gathered in 1979. And it's been a real pleasure that finally, unfortunately, as I say, when Carol died, and then Joan and I tried to continue to work on this book, but it was thanks to Mary Linda who came to our rescue. And I love the book, and we are indebted to her. And I know Joan and Carol would be thrilled to know that we are finally going to have a complete record of this book that to me is easily read. And it reads more like a novel than a history of what happened in 79. But with that, I'd like to turn it over to Mary Linda or to whomever wants to come in at this point. I suppose it's Mary Linda.
I think it is. And I'm glad to know that at least I've acquitted myself by writing the book that in those days, and I do remember, I don't remember so much a book, should or shouldn't be written, but I do remember wanting us to look forward and not look backwards in order to get the college moving. Well, I thank Nancy personally for the honor of compiling and writing this book, because I started in October 2017, and we sent the last and final draft in March of 2020. But to me, it's a thrilling story. Can you imagine in 2.5 months, a group of women and some men, like Nancy properly said, the lawyers and Drew Strice and many others, I'm certain, in 2.5 months, they did 3 things. They gathered evidence for a court trial that could show that, in fact, the college had a case for remaining open, and it had to be a compelling case. They planned for the future of the college. They got people to sign up who said they'd become trustees. They had a whole plan for what they would do differently for the curriculum, for the admissions, for development. And they raised $1.2 million, 1979, in cash and pledges. All of that from February the 19th, 1979, until the court case began on May 7th, 1979, and the judgment was given on May 25th, 1979. Really remarkable, and I think very inspirational for all of us. And given that we're facing crisis again, I thought Nancy and I said, you know, who would have thought that this book would be coming out just at a time that our dear college would be facing yet another really major crisis. But to me, this gives hope. If it had not been for the willingness, and I particularly thank Amy Ansley and Barbara Mystic and Don Bletz, because they gave Barbara and Amy gave me full access to all of the information. And when Nancy said that she and Joan and Carol worked, gracious did they work. I had 19 boxes of information in the archives. Nearly 1,400 pages of court materials, which I boiled down to about, hopefully, a readable 22. And then I think really what makes it more of a novel than an academic book is that Nan Clarkson also had wanted to write this. There were numerous people who wanted to write about this period. And Nan took copious notes. And she had 2 sets of notes. She had her notes on everything that happened when she became, she had been on the board, and then she remained on the board after the college was said that it had to be open. And she remained as chair through my first year, through Don Bletz, and then through my first year as president. Well, she had all of her notes from that, but then she also had a private journal that even her children were not allowed to read. So when I called her and said, could I come please to Buffalo and spend the weekend and read all of that and take notes and use it, she could have easily said no, but she didn't. She said yes. And so we had a wonderful weekend. That would have been in October of 2018 that we spent our weekend together. She regrettably, of course, just died also. And she knew the book was out because she had gotten I had sent her a copy of everything that we had so that she could approve everything that I had taken from her. Really hundreds of pages of notes and journals. So this book owes a debt to so very many people. And it's a book that is more compiled than written. It is written, but it's also compiled from many sources, because in the process, Nancy and I really had two goals. First of all, the book should be written in the voices of the people there at the time, not reinterpreted by my voice. And so that's the reason we use newspaper articles. We use article of Higher Education, Change magazine, and then articles that were written for the college. Lots and lots and lots of articles from the Chambersburg newspaper. I don't know how the Chambersburg newspaper managed after this crisis was over, because so much of that newspaper was devoted to us. So I began with a history of the college, but taking it from the newspaper, because they had Dr. Haven's voice, and it was very accurate. I had double checked it against what had been written, that he had actually written about the idea of Wilson College. And then went through to the first chapter, which is the longest and the most detailed and in chronological order, of Save Wilson, what happened. And from that into the court case, the Alumni versus the Board of Trustees. We are still a singular case in higher education history where the alumni took the board to court and won the case. And the only reason that that could have happened was because the board, and Dr. Wagner had said this in one of her writings, had been told that they did not have, that they could declare the college closed and they could move ahead with thinking about the next steps without going to the court. That, of course, turned out not to be the case. And that was the legal hook that allowed this college to take the case forward. Otherwise, it probably never would have happened, because courts are very averse to taking on a board of trustees and taking over their decision making. In fact, the board finally did file on May 4th. But by that time, the court trial was starting just 3 days later. And so it was beside the point. And all of the announcements had been made about the closing of the college. So we cover the court case. And then the next chapter deals with the aftermath and perspectives. Needless to say, not everyone was thrilled that this had happened. And there were a lot of people in the higher education establishment that were nervous about it and really very unhappy about it. And so we include there a number of articles and sections of articles where they talk about the dangers of this having happened. I cared a great deal, not only about the voice, but about fairness, as did Nancy. This was not to disparage the former administration. This was simply to present the facts as best and the interpretations of the facts, but not anonymously, as best we could. And so I reached out to Mary Patterson McPherson, and some of you may remember Mary Pat. She, at that point when she was on the board at Wilson, was also president of Bryn Mawr College. And then she went on to head, to head the higher education section of the Mellon Foundation. Very influential woman in higher ed. And she had greeted me very warmly when I came, because I did want to reach out to her when I was offered and accepted the presidency. And so I reached out to her and asked if she could be in touch with Margaret Wagner, because what I wanted to do was send the book as we had it to date, and particularly in that case, the first 3 chapters, the Save Wilson, the court case, and the aftermath and perspectives. Could I send them to her and to Dr. Wagner and have them read them and tell me if there was anything that they felt was false or wrong, or something else that needed to be said that would more fairly present their case. And Mary Pat did. She read everything, and then I sent her the final book, which she read. And then I called Dr. Wagner, and when I called her, I said, Dr. Wagner, this is Mary Linda Armacost. Hi, girlie, she said. She's in the woods in Massachusetts. But she said she didn't know that she really could relive that time because it was very, very painful. But she had it. And the other person who is in the book, and I was very grateful to her for writing, she has several pages, is Marty Walker. Because Marty Walker was the chair of the Board of Trustees during all of this. A young woman, pregnant, gave birth shortly after all of this happened. And very much involved, of course, in the Chambersburg community. So she too read and approved and wrote quite a wonderful statement. And then I had Nan read her statement and write something in response to Marty's statement because, of course, Nan Clarkson had worked very closely with her. From there, we moved on then to Dr. Bletz's 2 years, and included in that, he had only signed up for 2 years, so everybody knew that they would be doing a search for president. And the search process, so included in his chapter is the search process, because it was a very unusual search process. In those days, you often hired a firm, but you didn't hire an industrial psychologist to give a whole day of intelligence tests and 5 hours of a personal interview. That simply wasn't known. And I remember when I was called and said, would you do it? I said, well, I would, as long as I saw all of the information that was given to the board and the search committee, and as long as it was just given actually to the board, not to the faculty and the students and more broadly. So there's a discussion of that search process and some really good back and forth, Nan's feelings, and particularly in our first year, things that we saw eye to eye on and things that we didn't so much see eye to eye on, and our process for working through those, because the board knew at that point that they really had one chance. And the fact that they chose the president was, to them, they were either going to succeed or they were not. So it became really critical. Then moved on to 1981 to 1989, because there were so many, and I focused this on the kinds of issues that Nancy and the Save Wilson Committee said were critical for the college to move forward. So on curriculum, and to that, I see Patty and Ray Cormier are here, and Patty Cormier deserves unbelievable credit. She and Carol Shaw, and I must say Susan Waring, who was our head of career planning and placement and was the stimulus behind the Child Care Center, which allowed Gwen Jensen then to move forward with the Women with Children program. Those three women were bulwarks, absolute bulwarks, and critical in the success of our moving forward and our having then and choosing to end this in 1989, when over 1,000 alumni, friends, and colleagues and faculty came back all in Laird Hall in October and formally celebrated the fact that Save Wilson was saved. So that was our ending point. I then end, however, with an epilogue, and I asked Gwen Jensen and Lorna Edmondson and Barbara Mystic to contribute what they considered their major accomplishments were in moving the college forward, because it's been 40 years. And each one of them responded and sent me the material. And all of that is in the epilogue in the book. So that's the genesis of the book and the process. So let me stop there and ask, are there any questions?
Mary Linda, the one
Yes. question
about, the one question about, the one question about, the one question about, the one question about, the one question about, the one question about, the one question about, the one question about, the one question about, the one question about, the one question about, the one question about, the one question about, the one question about, the one question about, the one question about, the one question about, the one question about, the one question about, the one question about, the one question about, the one question about, the one question about, the one question about, the one question about, the one question about, the one question about, the one question about, the one question about, the one question about, the one question about, the one question about, the one question about, the one question about, the one question about, the one question about, the one question about, the one question about, the one question about, the one question about, the one question about, the one question about, the one question about, the one question about, the one question about, the one question about, the one question about, the one question about, the one question about, the one question about, the one question about, the one question about, the one question about, the one question about, the one question about, the one question about, the one question about, the one question about, the one question about, the one question about, the one question about, the one question about, the one question about, the one question about, the one question about, the one question about, the one question about, the one question about, the one question about, the one question about, the one question about, the one question about, the one question about, the one your decision to not interview students who were members of the class of 79 or 80 for the book?
That's a wonderful question. To be very honest about it, I didn't really interview people for this. I used written documentation. In retrospect, it would have been wonderful if I had selected some faculty and some students and had interviewed them for the book. But I truly didn't think about that as a part of the book. I was much more centered on the archives and written material.
And just a reminder, if you have questions, to please put them into the chat box and we will share them to Mary Linda or to Nancy.
Well, let me move forward then, because I think a lovely way of giving you a sense of this is to actually quote from the writings of Joan Edwards, because as Nancy said, there were a lot of memoirs kept, and she wrote a lot and Carol wrote a lot. And this is not too long at all. So let me read it to you. For 20 years, a voice within me and my friends and strangers urged me to write down the history of the 1979 Save Wilson story. Various accounts have been published in the media, in Wilson documents written to celebrate anniversary events, and in at least one book. And that one book was done by a woman who did it as her, actually a graduate of the college, who did it as her thesis in Canada. So it was her dissertation, actually. However, to my knowledge, never have the events been documented by those who were the participants. Although many of the principal players in that dramatic chapter of Wilson's history threatened to and/or promised to write a book, we find the task never undertaken until some 20, and then I put in parentheses, now 40 years later. I believe that there are two reasons for this. Those persons found themselves so involved in the aftermath, the real saving of the college, on the board or in other volunteer roles, that there was no real time to reflect on and write the history. What is in modern lingo called political correctness was a huge factor. Understandably, post-79 college administrators faced with the challenges of recruiting students, what Nancy said, and raising funds, wished the story of Wilson's near closing would be forgotten. The sooner the better. Others argued that the dramatic intervention of the alumni to save one of the endangered species of women's colleges was and is a story that should be remembered and celebrated because it was a testimonial to the liberally educated women, in particular the Wilson woman, of whom we are unabashedly proud, all of you. And thousands, really. At that point, when I became president, there were 6,000 alumni. After all, was this not what 1979 was all about? Did not the alumni insist that the mold not be broken, not go out of existence? The day in May 1979, when the court decided that the demise of tiny Wilson College was not to be allowed, most people were shocked by the outcome, including many who had worked on saving it. I added that. We had learned respect, admiration, and a certain underdog appeal of the community and some of the press, and even the grudging admiration of a few of the adversaries. Around here, Judge Keller was a hero, but ultimately in the search for whom to credit, one of our young attorneys said it best: a classy bunch of broads. Now, classy means of superior quality, stylish. I'll accept that. The origin of the slang word broad, I'd rather not get into, except that it does stand for women, And who can argue that Wilson alums are that? When the dust settled, we were delighted with his compliment. The other very female thing about the situation was the exuberant use of the telephone. My husband, with 4 women in the family, remarked early on that I was an expert in that area. The fact is that 90% of the planning was done on the phone. The housewives during the day, the career gals far into the night. You see, we lived all over the country, and many people have remarked, probably quite accurately, that AT&T profited highly from the threatened closing. The principal figures in Save Wilson actually compared phone bills in each of those months. It seemed a badge of commitment. When the bills went back to normal, we knew the crisis was over. If you have never joined a cause, you won't believe this story. If you have, then you will empathize. It is not only my story. Thousands of Wilson alumni shared it. The only difference being you lived further away and perhaps felt you were doing too little. For those of us in Chambersburg on the scene, it was a period of 4 months of intense emotion, frustration, excitement, fear, and ultimately joy. That gives you some sense from Joan, who also, before she died, had a chance to see at least the first part of the book, at least the first 3 chapters. Carol, of course, died in 2014, and so she didn't have a chance to see. So let me stop there and see if there are questions.
I do have a few questions here. There's several people who are commenting, thank you so much for your work and leadership and sharing these important stories with everyone. Question, is there a primary driver that turned Wilson around?
I would say that there were several. First of all, without question, the people. Everyone that stayed or was recruited onto the administration, that stayed or was recruited onto the board, were determined. I mean, we were simply determined. I never gave a thought to not making it. So attitude had an awful lot to do with it. But then what really had a lot to do with it was, and I credit Patty with a lot of this, was getting the right curriculum together and staying abreast of what was needed. And starting the Division of Continuing Education. And then therefore being able to reach out to adults and being able to reach out to Letterkenny and having both men and women involved in that. That was a bit of a tension with the faculty. And this is a kind of interesting story. The faculty, when I took it to them at the beginning of May, when all the students were there, and I said, you know, this is going to come before the board, and I would like to have you vote on it, obviously, first. Turned it down. I said they would not vote. They did not vote for continuing education, for continuing studies. So I waited and went back to them right before the board meeting after the students had left. And it passed 32 in favor, 1 abstention, which was really interesting to me. It gave more time to think, but it also showed how sensitive they were to the feelings of the students. Had we not done that, I think, in all honesty, we wouldn't have made it, because our numbers in 1989, actually when I left in 91, we were head count close to 900. Not frankly too far away from head count in recent years. And that was because of the Division of Continuing Studies.
What lessons do you think this story holds for higher education today? Several people have said if they themselves or their relatives have studied higher education, they actually studied the Wilson experience.
That's true. My students who were involved at the University of Pennsylvania doctoral program all got it, at least for the last 3 years, and Barbara Mystic came to the class, and Harvard has a case study on it also. So everyone who went through the Harvard program, I did, but before Wilson had the case study. I think there are several lessons for higher education. One is you absolutely have to change with the times. If you do not change with the times will change anyway. And a president's job and the senior staff and the alumni and the board's job is to translate, to talk, to understand, to educate people on what the current conditions are and what the changes are that really need to be made. And those are curricular as well as markets. What additional markets with what we have to offer can we develop in order to increase our reach and our revenue? So changing with the times and having a good sense of what those times are, and that's where having good people working with you is utterly critical. The second is, and no small matter, you need money. And we were exceptionally fortunate. Carol Shop was a miracle. And I know Patty would agree with me on this. She was absolutely a miracle. Well, first of all, she was totally determined too that we were going to survive. And she knew, and there are a number of stories in the book, some that are really kind of funny, where she's ended up at the wrong funeral, giving everybody her sadness on behalf of the college, and turned out not to be the right funeral. And several stories with me, but she was relentless, and I traveled. I'll never forget one faculty meeting where the faculty said, "Oh, you care about is money. You don't care about us." And of course, I did care a great deal about them, but without money, their salaries couldn't have been paid, and we wouldn't have gone on. So it was the coming together of the alumni, the gradual, and it was gradual, getting foundations back on board and having them contribute. We had, on average, over 1 year, it was $948,000. That was our lowest year of annual fund in my 10 years there. So we were always around $1 million to $1.2 million every year in annual fund. And then we did have bequests and that were unrestricted, and we were able to use those, sadly, because you never like to do that. But we paid back the endowment. Dr. Blitz had to borrow $250,000 from the restricted endowment with the understanding it would be paid. And we paid that back in the middle of the 1980s. That was a very high priority of mine, that we honor that commitment. And we balanced our budgets throughout the year, because you can't raise money unless you can show that you're a going concern. Those, I think, are the main lessons.
Yeah, I think you've touched on some of this, but in thinking about today and Wilson's future, keys to keeping the energy and connectiveness going.
Well, I am very, very impressed with the president that the board has selected. I think he has energy, he has commitment, he works very, very hard. He met me and read this book in, oh gracious, in January, and then before he actually started, and then we met in Sarasota and discussed it. He was thoroughly up on what was going on. And his leadership style is one of inclusiveness. He's gotten the faculty totally behind changes that need to be made. And fundamentally, what he's saying is, business as usual cannot go on. In other words, our current business plan is not sustainable. And therefore we need new ways of reaching out. So I think, and this book I think shows that too, that if you need to recognize when what you're doing is not sustainable, which puts me back in mind, I did try to reach out to one of the students, much like I had reached out to Nan, Gretchen Van Ness. And I used an article about her because she was critical, but she would not respond. So that was one that I did try to bring in to the story.
And a question for Lynn. Lynn, can you repeat the information about where they can get the book?
Sure, I'll even unmute myself for that one. The Amazon, we have paperbacks available through Amazon.com, and those cost $15. And if you want the hardcover book, you can get those at Lulu, LULU.com, and those are $25. There are links on the Facebook page, places like that. So if you look around, you might actually find a link that you could use to just click on through. Otherwise, you can search on the title or search on the author's names and the books will show up.
And if you use Amazon, go through Amazon Smile for Wilson and the Alumni Association gets some money.
Yes, yes, I hope everybody is using Smile and naming the Alumni Association as your preferred charity.
There's a question about change, and since you were talking about change and moving forward, your thoughts, Mary Linda, about what that means for changes in curriculum and how in higher education in general.
Okay, I'm going to answer that, but I just saw a note from Amy, and she's absolutely right. Unfortunately, when we were getting this book ready for publication, Kendra Kitt, who's on our staff now as a designer, did a phenomenal job, I think, in the design of this book. And she's not credited in the writing. Just didn't think fast enough to rewrite a portion to add her in. And so a shout out to Kendra is absolutely critical that you know that. I don't know how many of you may have sat in on the president's presentation of the strategic plan going forward in curriculum, but it strikes me that he and the faculty, because he stressed the faculty really did it. And that's critical. But the way they are moving in terms of, well, I'm not going to remember all of them, but you can easily get a copy of that presentation and look at what they're doing with business and finance and what they are doing with the sports, and particularly what they're doing with medicine and nursing in the health fields, because Chambersburg is such a mecca for that area, for Franklin County in that field. So it's meeting the needs, curriculum that's meeting the needs, mixing the liberal arts, and this, of course, you'll see this in the book. Dr. Wagner, in one sense, in my opinion, really cannot be blamed. I mean, there are things that certainly she should have done differently. But the board, when they hired her, wanted, and it's very clear from the early writings of the 70s, they wanted somebody who would stay with the pure liberal arts. Charlie Cole, who had followed Dr. Havens, had tried to move into continuing education and be more responsive to the changes of the women's movement in those days. Those of you old enough to remember the early 70s when more women were moving into careers, and the faculty would have none of it. And so Dr. Wagner really did what she felt she was hired to do. Now, she didn't have very much experience in administration, and you'll see that in the book. And she wasn't able to take a leadership position in moving things when they really needed to be moved. But she did follow what the board originally wanted her to do. Well, today, and Wes made this I thought, very eloquently. He said, today, that tension between career and liberal arts really is dissolving, because you have a liberal arts basis for these programs in the careers. People who can afford to pay what it costs to go to college these days need to know that there's a pathway to a job, and with or without graduate education, and mostly a job and then graduate education. And I think this faculty in here are really on top of those changes.
Currently, there are no more questions. There are many, many thank yous for doing your work and for carrying on the tradition of developing persistent, confident women and now men at Wilson.
Yeah, you're also very, very welcome.
As we get closer to the end of our lunch hour, if you have any other questions, put them in the chat box. But any parting words from Mary Linda and Nancy?
Well, it does occur to me, let me read just 2 paragraphs from what Carol wrote, because this would have been the start of her Wilson narrative. And she wrote this in 2012, and you're going to recognize some of this. By dawn, on Monday, February 19th, 1979, South Central Pennsylvania, as well as much of the Northeast United States, was blanketed under nearly 2 feet of snow. Now, is that not current today? Schools were closed, businesses shuttered, and traffic, with the exception of the occasional snowplow, was non-existent. The residents of Chambersburg, Pennsylvania, drank their coffee and prepared to spend the day shoveling their sidewalks and digging out their cars. I had just come into the house after beginning this chore when the phone rang around 12:30 p.m. I assumed the call was from a friend calling to commiserate about the weather and the labor ahead. Instead, the caller was a Wilson College student, a member of the Kittatinny Players, the school's drama club, for whom I had just begun to direct their spring production. The conversation went something like this. Carol, you won't believe what just happened. They voted to close the college. What? Who voted to close the college? What are you saying? And tearfully, she replied. I think that's a good place to end that, unless there are any other questions. I miss her. I miss her a lot.
Me too.
I do too, Mary Linda.
She
I
left,
miss Joan and Carol very much.
she left us much too soon.
Much too soon.
May I just add, I would just like to add that after the court decision was rendered, I had received a note from Judge Keller, and he said, Nancy, when I first heard about the approach to the courts about the Wilson 1979 decision to close the college, he said, I really thought you were dreaming the impossible dream. And so every time I hear the impossible dream,
Yes.
I think of Jack Keller.
And maybe this final comment is perfect as we close. I'm so grateful for the courage and leadership of those Wilson women who took the reins and saved Wilson, and grateful to the subsequent leaders. So thank you, Nancy, and thank you, Mary Linda. Thank you, Lynn. And thank you all for taking time out of your day and your lunch hour to join us. We hope, as always, that you'll stay connected to Wilson and reach out to us if we can assist you or if you need updates or information, we are happy to help you in any way that we can. And we appreciate, your assistance back to us.
May I just say that anybody is welcome to call me or email me, and I'm happy to continue the conversation, to give whatever additional thought and discussion that you might have. And I think probably the best way to do that is you all have Mary way of getting in touch with Mary Beth, and she can send out my email address and telephone number. Can you do that,
Sure.
Mary Beth? Yeah.
Yes.
Because I'd be happy to hear from you and to be responsive in any way that I can.
Sure.
So
We will be-
grateful to have been part of the miracle.
The miracle is Mary Linda.
Yeah.
The miracle was Mary Linda. The best ever, the best president in the whole wide world.
Oh, gracious.
No
That's the
pressure.
That sets me off for my 7-year-old. You can see my pictures behind me.
I see it, yeah.
Who would have thought that age 70 I would have a child?
Great.
We're young still.
Yeah, what do you mean? We're in our 80s. What are you talking about?
Oh, our daughter, Peter, when I married, had 4 children, and our youngest was never married and couldn't live without a child. And at 47, adopted a mixed race, drug addicted, but now perfect baby, and cut the umbilical cord. And I said, oh, occasionally will help. When I held him in my arms at 23 hours old, I said, forget that, we'll take him home. I got one too, I said to Peter. Peter said, no, I don't think so. But we have him every day for a part of the day. So I have my child.
That's perfect. We will create a link and send that out to everyone, and we will include Mary Linda's email, as well as the information as to where you can find and purchase the book if you'd like that as well. We'll send that as a reminder. So,
I just want to say the Cormiers deserve some of this credit too. You were there on the front line.
Absolutely. They deserve a lot of this credit.
No, I can tell you it was a privilege to work with her. A privilege, believe me. I learned more from her than I've ever learned from anybody else. She was a phenomenal mentor, and made it actually possible for me to take a presidency and to go, because she had, having gone through what I did at Wilson with Mary Linda, I learned a lot about what it is that you can do and what it is you can't do, and that's invaluable, absolutely invaluable.
Especially dealing with the faculty.
Who are just sweethearts most of the time. Anyway, well, thank you, Mary Linda, for being in my life.
Oh, let's all give
Thank you,
Mary
Mary
Linda
Beth.
and Nancy applause.
Bravo
Thank
to all
you.
of you.
Yes.
Bravo.
You're welcome.
Thank you, everyone.
Happy
Yeah.
holidays.
Happy
Yeah.
holidays.
Happy holidays.
You all be safe.